Oh, look, Jason, we thought we were going to be talking to ourselves.
People are gluttons for punishment. They keep coming back to us.
All of these years. Cool. Well, folks, thanks for getting here early. We'll give it a few minutes per usual, and then just dive right in. Great. It's nothing like the pre-read through nervousness, you know, Jason?
Oh, by now we shouldn't be nervous at all.
Just for folks who are popping in, just appreciate you being here. This is definitely we're launching this read through, kind of in a soft start, but in a good way. Idea of kind of setting the cadence, and beginning to create the framework for how we'll breeze through these adult use cannabis regulations. If you have any questions, feel free to drop things in the chat. There's also the opportunity for the Q&A, and we monitor these heavily, so it's just the best way to engage. And then, yeah, to anyone who's out there watching this, this is being recorded, and we intend to upload them to YouTube, make them available to the public. We're going to continue to build out this platform and invite other folks to be co-readers, co-speakers, to have a diverse group of folks who are offering perspective from all lenses looking at this industry. And again, this is day one. The topic we'll be covering is essentially the definitions, the opening statements that kind of create the framework for the language that we'll see throughout the entire regulations document. And folks who are this is your first read through you've ever checked in with, make sure you check online on YouTube. We've read through the MRTA in the past, the CBD regs, et cetera, through New York Hemp Lab, and we'll make sure that those links are also accessible. And we're doing this because we believe education and access to information is a foundation for an equitable and accessible industry. And so again, whether you're with us live today or you're watching it, recording it, we want to make sure that this is accessible to everybody. And for me and for Jason and for our community, one of the best ways that we learn is through talking about these things. And this read through is kind of like a classroom setting that allows for dynamic engagement, some, again, Q&A for folks who are live. So if you're watching this recorded, try to check out the next one. We'll make sure that there will be links to register for this programming in any of our YouTube posts or recording posts. But yeah, and so we're here to set this thing into motion. We anticipate minimum covering 20 pages per day. Some stuff may be denser and require less, and hopefully there's going to be other sections that we'll pass through a lot faster. Jason, you have anything you'd like to add just from kind of like a structural standpoint?
I don't think so. I think we're just gonna, try to get through it. We got 300 pages thereabouts. And, we want to do a thorough job, but we also want to be efficient.
Yeah, great. So happy to announce that this program is in partnership between the Cannabis Association of New York, CANY, and the Rochester Public Library. Jason and I have both been working with both CANY and the Rochester Public Library for years, trying to help build out, be contributing members to this emerging industry. And, the reason why we're connected with the Rochester Public Library is libraries are one of the few remaining free public institutions in New York State. We anticipate pushing this information through the library systems in New York, again, to increase accessibility. My name is Zach Sarkis. I'm the chair of the education committee for the Cannabis Association of New York. Other hats I wear, I've been working on licensed AUCC cultivation operations, with helping everything from consulting to running seed to sale production. Have been working in this space, helping with brands, and have a long-standing relationship with this plant, and have a lot of excitement with watching it emerge. And I will introduce Jason, who'll be my co-lead on this. You can introduce yourself.
That you were going to introduce me.
I meant to say I'm going to hand the mic over.
I'm Jason Klemick. I am the chair of the policy committee with CANY. I also chair the tax committee for the New York State Bar's Cannabis Association, Cannabis Law Section. And I am the co-leader of the cannabis practice at Barclay Damon. And yeah, Zach and I have been doing this for a few years now, and just trying to get through the regs, help people understand things, give some insights, and hopefully answer some questions and engage in a little dialogue.
Yeah, and so one of the main reasons why we're doing this, and we're choosing to do this on these draft regs, is to help drive comments, help people develop their own comments, their own perspective, ask questions, create perspective that allows for more robust comments, which hopefully leads to more functional and regulations getting published that are really reflective of what we want as a community at large. So throughout this process, we'll be alluding to maybe comments that we may personally advocate for, or at least asking questions. There may be clarification requests, like identifying something that doesn't have enough information that could be a little obscure. There could be also counter proposals where we might identify something that looks bad or wrong, or at least questionable, which there could be a follow-up comment that is a proposal based on facts or other markets, et cetera. So this is kind of some of the lenses that we look at this as we're moving through. Again, if we're looking through this first part, we'll be looking at the definitions. It's probably not going to be too crazy, but there's still places in there that I personally have questions that I'll bring up. And again, by no means are we trying to say that our perspectives are the right perspectives. And again, we'll bring more folks in through this conversation moving forward. But the idea is to ask questions, create perspective, and see where we can ask for clarity or offer alternative proposals to the OCM to help this regulatory build out.
And I'd just add too that definitions don't seem super exciting, but they are very important. And, obviously that's what controls when the word is used. And on the other side of that coin, sometimes, and we've seen this in guidance and things like that, words are used that aren't defined, and then we have no idea what that actually means. So definitions, though maybe a little boring, are really important.
Yep. Again, feel free to drop questions in the chat in the Q&A. And then also, if folks feel like they're kind of side by side with us offering comments, like we're happy to talk offline and can bring more voices and perspective to the table. So I will. The way we're going to do this is I have a PDF. I'm going to share my screen. We got a blank PDF. So the regs. Today is December 15th, 2022. Yesterday, December 14th. The proposed regs were actually put into the New York State Register, which actually initiates the 60-day comment period we have. So we're as our friend Alistair reminded us this morning, there are 59 days left for the comment period. Dun, dun, dun. And so we're going to take the published regs, which are actually slightly different than the original release regs, some coding differences, some subtle language changes, and we'll be going that line by line. Likely, I'll have a highlighter tool, so I'll be highlighting things that I think are important. I'll double highlight, make it a darker color for things that I think are really important, as well as use the sticky notes to ask questions, or I'll leave questions for myself to follow up. So that's just kind of my internal process, but hopefully that can help others in determining how and what's the best way for them to develop their own comments and understand and digest these regulations. So. All right, I will share my screen here. Okay, cool. And I'm just going to open a couple of these things here. Jason, that look all good to you?
Yeah, maybe zoom in like once or twice.
Okay, cool. Yep, just doing a little bit of formatting here. once or twice. I think twice is going to be too much. All right, so this is just the table of contents, nothing pretty, but obviously we're going to start today at part 118, definitions. Hopefully we clear through that, and then we'll continue going through part, each one of these calls. We'll be doing bi-weekly calls, if you're not aware, Tuesday, Thursday, noon until 1:15 p.m. until we're done. And we're estimating it's going to take us 18 sessions, so 9 weeks to complete this. And hopefully that should line up with just around the end of the comment period. And then, as we're beginning to wait for the OCM to answer the questions and comments and concerns that we proposed. All right, I will jump down here. Do you want to just jump into definitions here?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, cool. Let me just get my highlighter tool ready. That's not the highlighter tool. Pardon any mix here. One moment. Close that. All right, and we should be just about good to go. All right, so Jason, let's find our cadence here. We'll pass back and forth. And maybe actually you could just do a little breakdown. All right, when we're looking at the 118.1a, like how would you just kind of give an overview of how to navigate this? If you're looking at from like a the numbers and letter perspective.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that the state doesn't do, which everybody wishes they did, was they don't indent. So normally when reading an outline to make it understandable, you would have A1 and then maybe like Romanet 1. Yeah, they don't do that. So yeah, it's one. So we're in part 118, which is the definitions. The part or section 118.1 starts the actual definitions. A is kind of the definitions again, and then 1 through 80 something, I don't know that off the top of my head, are the actual definitions under the law. So that's where we're going to start. And then some of them, like you'll see in number 3, it has 3 Romanets underneath it. So
and so right now we'd read this as let's just say act, as we're going to define act. It's section 118.1 A1 is act. And so that's just important to note when we're navigating this space, because sometimes we may refer to other sections and annotations, and just understanding kind of how and why we're saying these things is important. All right, great. So I guess I can take the lead here. First definition we are rolling with is act. Act means the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act, or the MRTA, Chapter 92 of the laws of 2021. Advertising means advertising is defined by Part 128 of this title. So I think
those are the packaging, labeling, marketing, and advertising regulations that were released earlier this year. I can't remember the exact month.
Yeah, which are also in the comment period as well. And it's just important to know that's not tucked in this document. So one thing that's been interesting and kind of challenging with these regs is like packages of regs have been getting dropped kind of inconsistently. So there's a packaging reg there and marketing regulations. There is your testing and laboratory regs. And so if you're not familiar with this and you receive this, like the regs, what you think is everything, you get the PDF open, knowing that not all sections are here and you still have to dig around a bit to find all the information you need. So just an important thing to note. Aggregate ownership interest means the total ownership interest held by the following or any combination of the following. 1, a legal entity or any legal entity of an individual in its multi-level ownership structure. 2, an individual and the spouse, domestic partner, civil union partner, child, sibling, or parent of such an individual. Or 3, a legal entity and any individual with control over such legal entity. So this is, yeah, go ahead.
This is a really important definition because this has true party of interest implications, because as we'll get to almost right at the end of this, you'll see that true party of interest has thresholds. So this is OCM telling us how they're going to add together people and entities to determine the total interest and whether or not you cross a threshold that might, go from non-TPI to TPI, which will then knock you out of certain licenses or tiers or anything like that.
Yep. So definitely a big thing, and we'll see this come up again and again and again. Applicant means applicant as defined as Article 1 in the cannabis law. Like, we could go back to the MRTA and break that down, but just know that's where you would look for this. Okay, artificially derived phytocannabinoid means a phytocannabinoid that is created by chemical reaction that changes the molecular structure of any chemical substance derived from cannabis sativa. Artificially derived phytocannabinoids does not include: 1, a naturally occurring chemical substance that is separated from cannabis sativa by chemical or mechanical extraction process. 2, phytocannabinoids that are produced by decarboxylation of the phytocannabinoids, naturally occurring carboxylic. Why am I pronouncing that right? You got a hand for me here? Carboxylic acid form without the use of a chemical catalyst. 3, any other chemical substance defined by the board. And 4, synthetic tetrahydrocannabinoids not derived from the cannabis plant, already prohibited as a Schedule 1 controlled substance in the Public Health Law, Section 3306, and prohibited in Section 123.6-F-5 of this title. So this is an interesting one. See. So, Stephanie asks, is THCV allowed or prohibited based on that? It comes down to, is it manufactured? Really, this isn't saying whether something's allowed or not. It's just defining what an artificially derived phytocannabinoid is. So I think a good example of this is Delta-8. Folks taking CBD and exposing it to a particular acid or chemical that then converts it into Delta-8 THC. So that's not, if it is naturally occurring, it's in very, very, very small amounts, but in bulk, like manufacturing, people are doing this conversion process. I think this is important too, because as we've heard discussions about folks like, can artificially derived phytocannabinoids include THC, or like, can there be hemp derived THC products on the market, or hemp converted, and so we'll be looking at that and what's prohibited or allowed downstream. But I do think it's important to identify, like, is this a naturally occurring thing or an artificial? And that's going to be informed. Like, is that going to inform what our packaging says? Are we going to have to market that, or is it going to be something that is kind of behind the curtain here? And if anyone else has any perspective on the THCV thing, feel free to drop it in the chat. All right, attractive to individuals under 21 means attractive to individuals under 21 of age as defined in Part 128 of this title, which we'll explore later. Biodiversity means the variety of animals, plants, fungi, microorganisms, and other living structures that make up our natural world. Each of these species of organisms work together in an ecosystem to maintain the balance and support life. Board means the New York State Cannabis Control Board as defined by Article 1 in the MRTA, the cannabis law. Bona fide labor organization means a bona fide labor organization as defined in Part 116 of this title.
That's the card regulations.
Thank you. That's why you're here, Jason. I see another question in the chat. Oh, okay, I see the chat. Thank you, Joe. I see that there's some issue with the chat here. Everyone, okay, cool. Let me just, all right, I think I just allowed everyone to have access to the chat. Give me a trial run there, Joe, if you would. Thank you very much. Yep, cool, I see you there. Wow, the crowd goes wild. There's never been so much excitement on said read through. Okay, great. So brand or branding means brand or branding is defined as Part 128 of the title, which again, we'll see. Packaging and labeling, which again, we'll probably have to have a breakdown of that after we read through these documents. The Cannabis Advisory Board means the State Cannabis Advisory Board as established in Section 14 of the Cannabis Law. Cannabis flower product means any form of cannabis product consisting of the flower, buds, and leaves of the cannabis plant, including trimmings thereof, intended for retail sale to consumers with minimal processing. A cannabis flower product shall not include any cannabis product requiring the blending, infusing, or extracting of cannabis. So that's just important to note. Yep, Josh asks, great to have the chat on. Will this recording be available to share? Absolutely. We will be sharing this and likely uploading to YouTube as soon as possible, and be sharing that out with everybody, especially folks who've RSVP'd on here, but we'll make sure we're hitting other kind of email and other direct access here. Cannabis merchandise includes, but is not limited to, clothing, hats, pencils, pens, keychains, mugs, water bottles, beverage glasses, notepads, lanyards, or cannabis accessories which include or display a brand of a licensee and comply with parts 128 and 129 of this title. So
because this has controversial implications.
Yep. Yeah, we'll definitely get to. Ooh, there's a lot of teasing here. I know folks are gonna be really excited for the next calls. Cannabis paraphernalia means any equipment, product, or material of any kind which is primarily intended or designated for use in vaporizing, ingesting, inhaling, or otherwise introducing cannabis product into the human body, or preparing, storing, and containing cannabis. Cannabis waste means all cannabis byproducts, scrap, harvested cannabis, and cannabis-infused products not intended for the sale to consumer or distribution to an entity licensed or registered under the cannabis law. Canopy or cultivation canopy, which is interesting. So there's a bridge there. Means an area to be calculated in square feet and measured using clearly identifiable boundaries of all areas that will contain non-immature cannabis, which shall be vegetative or flowering plants, excluding seedlings or small clones, including the spaces within the boundaries. Canopy may be non-contiguous, but each unique area included in total canopy calculations shall be separated by an identifiable boundary, including, but not limited to, interior walls, shelves, greenhouse walls, hoop house walls, garden benches, hedgerows, fencing, garden beds, or garden plots. So there's a couple things in here like, non-immature cannabis plants. How are we defining immature cannabis plants? We'll see that moving forward. There's currently a definition for your AUCC cultivators that has been brought to our attention that is different than how this document is defining immature cannabis plants, which immature is something non-flowering, so not showing any signs of flower. And in this document, it will say up to 2 feet tall, which is a foot taller than what current AUCC are considering immature, et cetera. So again, these are these discrepancies we need to look for and make sure that they're contiguous, so there isn't any confusion. It's also important to say, like, your canopy could be separated by beds. If you're working at a farm and you have permanent beds, it's the area, you have your bed area that will be covered by the plant, but if the plant goes over your bed and into your walkways, that will be considered your canopy. So when you're planning, it's your license type is going to be based on your canopy size when we're talking about cultivation. So if you have rows between your beds that are walkable that aren't covered, you're going to be calculating the zones that are actually covered or your anticipated covering. So definitely important to note. Also know, like, as a cultivator, I've seen when you plant plants that you think are going to be a certain canopy and then they double the size of what you expect. And so you no longer have pathways between your beds. And again, that could have negative repercussions from like a cost, like a licensing cost, and or like going over your legal canopy and your production. All right, canopy tier or tier means the level of cultivation canopy in which a licensee is permitted to cultivate within minimum and maximum square footage range as defined for each license type. Cash means US currency, certified check, money order, electronic funds, transfer, bank officers, check or draft, or check drawn to an account or on an account. Certificate of analysis means certificate of analysis as defined as part 130 this title, which is the testing and labs section, correct? And civil practice law and rules, or the CPLR, means Chapter 8 of the Consolidated Laws in New York. Jason, you want to take community facility?
Sure. So a community facility means a facility that may include, but not be limited to, a facility that provides daycare to children, a public park, a playground, a public swimming pool, a library, or a center or facility where the primary purpose of which is to provide recreational opportunities or services to children or adolescents. A municipality may issue a local law regarding community facilities that are not unreasonably impracticable. That has big implications, because that can kind of expand the radius of where a dispensary or a retail establishment is not prohibited. So, important definition. Concentrate or concentrated cannabis means the separated resin, whether crude or purified, obtained from cannabis, or a material, preparation, mixture, compound, or other substance which contains more than 3% by weight or volume of total THC. Control or controlling interest. This is another important one, because it has implications for social and economic equity applicants, maintaining control. So very important. Control or controlling interest means the authority to order or direct the management, operations, managers, or policies of a person, including but not limited to the ability or authority expressed or reserved to amend or change the corporate or operating identity, for example, a joint venture agreement or unincorporated business status of a person, approve operating and capital budgets for the person, adopt, approve, or direct fiscal operating policies and procedures, approve debt necessary to finance the person's cost of compliance with operational or facility standards required by law, approve contracts for the management of facility services, hire or dismiss executive personnel, maintain and control the books and financial records of the person, control any assets of the person, encumber the assets of the person by way of mortgage or other indebtedness, and dissolve the person or arrange for sale or transfer of the person to a new ownership or control. So one observation there is it's and, not or. So it would seem that if you don't have just one of those things, you no longer have control for purposes of the regulations, which is really important, because a lot of times, if you're the 51% owner, you bring in an investor, that investor may want some say in some things, and you act under this, presumably you have to have unilateral control if you were that 51%, call it social equity applicant or social equity licensee. So it seems to be a pretty restrictive definition, though consistent with things like the women and minority owned business status already in place in New York. Okay. Corrective action plan means a corrective action plan as defined in part 133 of this title. Those are the emergency enforcement regulations, which are already in place. I believe they are an emergency. They are valid for 120 days and then they come back up, but they are currently in place. Craft product. This means a flower or pre-roll cannabis product or any cannabis product as established by the office and guidance, which is hand trimmed, my favorite definition, hand dried, and hand packaged by one or more individuals, and receives a craft designation from and shall be processed and manufactured exclusively by a licensed tier 1 cultivator. And we'll get into that the definition of tiers comes in part 120. Tier 1 cultivator with a set canopy tier is set forth in subparagraph I, or Romanet 1, not sure, of paragraph 2 of subdivision B of 120.3 of this title, and shall only use cannabis or cannabis material that is cultivated by said licensee and not sourced from another cultivator, processor, or any other licensee, or a licensed micro business of any type.
Mhm. So just for a time out here, like one thing we've been talking about, and I personally been curious about, is like, okay, a licensed tier 1 cultivator for outdoor canopy is 5,000 square foot max. A tier 2 is 5,000 square foot to 12,500. So it's just interesting to note where a micro business is able to cultivate up to 10,000 square feet of outdoor production. And so immediately you have a micro business that could grow twice as much cannabis outdoor as a tier 1 cultivator. But the micro business could be considered craft and the tier 1 wouldn't, just based on the size of production. Brings up the next question again, like if a machine touches a small scale grows product, does it no longer become craft? Should we be prohibiting automation or efficiencies, technological advancements in small scale production here? Like, could it be too limiting to say only hand dried? I'm more on the side of, hand production personally, but like I could see where it could hurt small cultivators if they weren't allowed to use new technology that would emerge, for example, in this process to build out efficiencies. There's also the question of like the production process. Someone could grow a small amount of herb and it could be poor quality and maybe not grown in a craft-like scenario, which like craft tends to allude to quality craftsmanship, the production process, like an actual intimate, hands-on, high quality, highly regulated quality control process. So I personally think that this definition is a little obscure and could be harmful if not like implemented according to standards that I think are held by the cultivation community. Like if this is just a top-down designation, it could be limiting or could miss some steps. So that being said, there's always it's a double-edged sword. Like I could make a recommendation on this and the OCM could come back and make edits that would make this incredibly limiting. Like they would define it further in a way that would make it more inaccessible. So I may just want more clarity, but my comment could also cause like a reaction for more restrictive instead of more open access. And so there's always this like kind of, plus or minus when we're looking at making comments on this and really looking at how do we define craft? I think this is a big one.
Agreed. Cultivation means the agricultural production practices of soil preparation, planting, growing, cloning, harvesting, drying, curing, grading, and trimming of cannabis plants for sale to certain other categories of cannabis license and permit holders. Cultivation cycle means entirety of the growing period, including germination, seedlings, cloning, vegetative and flowering stages of cannabis growth. Date of expiration means the date of expiration as defined in part 128 of this title. Again, packaging and labeling regs. Debarment means debarment as defined in part 133 of this title. That's the enforcement. I would suggest that everybody who wants a license, has a license, read through part 133 at some point, and I'm sure we'll get to it at some point, but it's really important, and you can see how OCM is setting up a very strict system. So
will you just give like a high level, like when I see it says debarment means debarment, I'm still like, what's debarment?
Yeah, it's the greatest definition ever, defining the word with itself. It basically means they ban you from the industry, or if you're not, or they can ban you from contracting with a licensee. So it's not just obtaining a license, but a licensee couldn't even contract with you to do something for them. So I mean, it's basically the OCM's equivalent of being able to revoke a license or something like that, but it's applicable to non-licensed people.
Great, thank you.
Edible means a product containing either cannabis or concentrated cannabis and other ingredients intended for use or consumption through ingestion, including sublingual or oral absorption. Employee in charge means an individual 21 years of age or older at management level designated by a retail dispensary to be responsible to perform or oversee the performance of the tasks in section 123.10 of this title and any other tasks required by the retail dispensary.
Do you think it's interesting that, like, I mean, I get why it's limited to retail, but like, you know, I'm curious as to why there isn't an employee in charge on all license types, I guess.
I agree with you.
Obviously it'd require more writing, but it's just like, you know, like reading through what the employee in charge requirements are, it's basically traceability, inventory management, yeah, you know, like be available on call for the OCM, be able to deliver, like, you know, all of this data on call by the OCM, and essentially like all license types will need to do that. So it's just an interesting thing.
Mhm. Energy report means a benchmarking self-assessment utilizing a reporting tool approved by the office, including but not limited to a licensee's energy consumption, costs, and greenhouse gas emissions, and identifies energy efficiency measures. Extracting means the process of concentrating or isolating one or more phytocannabinoids from cannabis.
I can take over once we get to the F's.
Exit package means the exit package as defined in part 128 of this title.
Great. Financial institution means any bank, mutual savings bank, consumer loan company, credit union, savings and loan association, trust company, or other lending institution other than the jurisdiction, lending institution under the jurisdiction of the Department of Financial Services. Financial interest. This is going to get my double highlight because it's important. Means any actual or future right to ownership, investment, compensation agreement with another person, either directly or indirectly through business investment, spouse, parent, or child, where the compensation exceeds the greater of 1, 10% of revenue, 2, 50% of net profit, or 3, $100,000. Persons with a financial interest does not include a passive investor. It's an interesting thing that the $100,000 thing is they've this is the first place I'm seeing it, if I'm not mistaken, without it being connected to contracting or service management agreement. It's just like a standalone 100,000, and I'm just noting that right now. I don't know if it means anything.
Yeah, I mean, because it ties back into the true party of interest stuff.
Yep.
And it's one of those things that everybody's going to have to kind of keep an eye on to make sure that they're not a true party of interest. But within the true party of interest and within, I think it's a section or part 125, or maybe 124. Yeah, 124, I think. They exempt certain relationships. So, for example, lawyers, accountants, like those are agreements that they completely exempt from all of this stuff. But other types of relationships, they're not going to do that. And then this one, actually, I had to think of like a scenario to make it make sense in my head, because a TPI, true party of interest, is a spouse of somebody like an owner or a CEO or something like that, but not necessarily a parent or a child. But then it also says having a financial interest means you're a TPI, and financial interest includes parent and child or child. So I was kind of like, what does that exactly mean? And the scenario that I came up with is basically you're trying to kind of get around the system by maybe you and your child both have license types, like you're a cultivator and they're a retail dispensary. That's okay. You can do that because the child is not a TPI of the parent. But if the parent were to have like a consulting agreement with the child as a way to kind of get some money out of the dispensary or something like that, that's where you trigger this financial interest with the parent and child. So it was kind of trying to put it into a context of where that made sense. And I think that's what kind of OCM was trying to get at, is if you have these roundabout agreements that try to get around our rules, this is kind of what catches you.
Cool. Financier means any person other than a financial institution or government subdivision or agency that provides capital as a gift, provides a grant, or lends capital pursuant to a secured or unsecured financial agreement. Agreements will be assessed based on the current and future right to ownership or interest on the licensee, including but not limited to the interest in the event of a default, bankruptcy, or reorganization. A financier may not receive an ownership interest, control of the business, or a share of revenue in excess of the greater of 10% gross revenue, 50% net profit, or $100,000 gross profits or net profits, a profit sharing interest, or a percentage of the profits in exchange for a gift, grant, or loan. Kind of just like the next level of what we were just talking about there. Oop. Goods and services agreement means a goods and service agreement as defined in part 124 of this title. Greenhouse means a structural or thermally isolated enclosed area that maintains a specialized, conditioned, and sunlit environment used for and essential to the cultivation, protection, or maintenance of plants. It can be included. It can include additional artificial lighting and climate control based on the cultivation techniques used. Ground transportation means the transportation that is over land and not on water or in the air, with the exception of, or for the purpose of this chapter, a ferry. Harvest batch means a unit of cannabis produced during a period of time under similar conditions, identifiable by a lot unique identifier that allows traceability. We'll see that come up again and again in the cultivation process. Hoop house means specialized unconditioned agricultural equipment having a framework covered with demountable polyethylene or polypropylene materials or materials of polyethylene or polypropylene nature, which is specifically designated, constructed, and used for agricultural production. The hoop house may include up to 20 artificial lights for propagation of seeds and clones. Lights shall meet the photosynthetic photon efficacy, the PPE requirements as determined by the office. Horticultural lighting equipment, HLE, means any lighting equipment, for example, fixtures, bulbs, ballast controls, etc., that uses energy for the cultivation of plants at any stage of growth. House of worship. House of worship means a whole building owned or leased by a religious corporation as described by New York State religious corporation law, or used by a religious corporation or association of any denomination pursuant to the written permission of the owner thereof, which is used by members exclusively as a meeting place for divine worship and other religious observances presided over by the members of a clergy. So a couple of things just stand out here is it's the whole building and used exclusively for divine worship or other religious observances, which is interesting because like there are places that have hybrid uses. And I just came across, like, I have a friend who's living in an apartment building. Well, it's not an apartment building. It's like commercial building. They're not living there. I shouldn't say that. But they're downtown and they're in a building, and a church just took over the floor above them. And so my question is, like, if there's now a church on, let's say, the fourth floor, you know, when we're looking at house of worship being a dictating measure as to where someone cannot set up a dispensary, for example, within proximity of a house of worship, like if a house of worship on the fourth floor of a commercial building, does that qualify? Like, does that set off that radius clause? What do you think, Jason?
In I forget which guidance I think it was for the card licensees, maybe they started talking about or no, I think it's in the municipal section of this one. Where they start defining what all it is and where you measure from and things like that. So I mean, something on the fourth floor probably means, I think for house of worship it's measuring from the doorway, not like schools where it's measuring from the ground.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
and again, just in this case, like, it's not, the whole building isn't owned or leased by, so it's like, does that even qualify? And that, I'm curious, like, it's just an interesting kind of like layer I hadn't considered.
Yeah.
Okay, immature plant means a non-flowering female cannabis plant or cannabis plant which does not have flower that may be observed by visual examination. In seedling or small clone stage, the immature cannabis plant cannot exceed 12 inches in height. So here's another place where we've seen a different definition of immature. We're down the road, like when we're looking at nurseries or in the cultivation section, this is it changes, which is interesting. Keep an eye on that. Indoor cultivation means the cultivation of cannabis. I'm gonna mark note of this here. Oops, that didn't work. Oh well. All right, so indoor cultivation means the cultivation of cannabis within an enclosed climate-controlled structure using only artificial light, heat, and dehumidification. Integrated pest management, IPM principles, means the following: identifying pests, their host, and beneficial organisms before acting, establishing monitoring guidelines for each pest species, establishing an action threshold for the pest, evaluating and implementing control tactics, and monitoring, evaluating, and documenting the results. So this is going to be a big thing that we'll see, especially on the cultivation side. A lot of recording, a lot of kind of proactive stuff. License means a written authorization as provided under the cannabis law, permitting persons to engage in specified activity authorized pursuant to the cannabis law. Licensee means an individual or entity who has been granted a license under the cannabis law. And a local law means a local rule or local regulation or local ordinance or action which is adopted by the municipality on manners otherwise not preempted by the cannabis law, provided, however, that such local law shall not be unreasonably impracticable as determined by the board. Lot unique identifier. This is just an important one to note. Also referred to as the lot number or barcode. Means any distinctive combination of letters, numbers, or symbols, or any combination of them from which the complete history of cultivation, manufacturing, processing, testing, custody, distribution, or recall of a lot of cannabis or cannabis product can be determined. So a lot of data there. That's your track and trace. Jason, you want to take on management service provider?
Management service provider means any person who is a party to a management services agreement, which is an agreement, contract arrangement, or other type of formal understanding between a vendor, consultant, or contractor and an applicant for a license or a licensee where the provider engages in professional services related to administrative and professional staffing, business operations, and business strategy, or consulting related to growing, processing, distributing, and selling of the plant or other core business functions under the licensee's authorization. This will be very important when we get to part 124. All right, manufacturing means to prepare, treat, modify, compound, package, or otherwise manipulate cannabis or cannabis extract into a cannabis product. Manufacturing shall not include cultivation as defined in Article 1 of the Cannabis Law, or extracting as defined in Part.
In this part. Yeah.
Marijuana-related offense means an offense defined in former sections 220.03 and 220.06 of the penal law, where the sole controlled substance involved was concentrated cannabis. In former sections 221, 05, 10, 15, 20, 35, and 40 of the penal law. In section 105.05 of the penal law, prior to the effective date of chapter 92 of the MRTA. And the sole conduct was an offense defined in former sections 121.35 or 121.40 of the penal law, in former section 3382 of the public health law, prior to the effective date as prescribed in subdivision 9 of 222.15 of the penal law. That is the current section of the penal law that controls cannabis criminalization. and the cultivation of such plants that was solely for the personal possession and use in Article 220 or Section 240.36 of the Penal Law.
Mm.
Mature cannabis plant means a flowering female cannabis plant or a cannabis plant which does have flower that may be observed by visual examination. In seedling or small clone stage, a mature cannabis plant exceeds 12 inches in height. Mechanical extraction means extraction using pressure, heat, or cold to extract cannabinoids and includes rosin presses, dry ice, or other similar processes without employing solvents or gases approved by the office. Mixed light means cultivation of mature cannabis in a greenhouse, hoop house with cannabis cultivation lights, glass house, conservatory, hothouse, or similar structure using a combination of sunlight and lighting, with all lighting requirements meeting the photosynthetic photon efficacy standards for the mixed light tier set out in Part 125.1 of this title. Municipality or municipalities means an administrative or governing body of official or official of counties with the authority to enact any local regulations, towns, cities, and villages, respectively, of New York State. Non-consumer package means non-consumer package as defined in Part 128 of the title. Another great definition. Outdoor cultivation means the cultivation of cannabis under natural sunlight and weather conditions with no artificial light, and includes hoop house cultivation with fans and no additional climate controls or lighting elements provided. However, an outdoor cultivation is permitted to use artificial lights as authorized by the office for propagation of cannabis seedlings and mother plants. Passive investor. This is another important one for true party of interest purposes. Passive investor means a person that is a true party of interest of a licensee with an aggregate ownership interest of no more than 5% of the outstanding shares of an applicant or licensee whose shares are publicly traded, or 20% of the outstanding shares or interests of any other entity, whether such shares or interest are current voting shares, future voting shares, current equity shares, or future equity shares of the applicant or licensee, and does not otherwise have any control or influence over the applicant or licensee. The total shares outstanding of future equity or future voting share classes shall be calculated as the entity's fully diluted share count, inclusive of all restricted stock units, options, warrants, or any other units of ownership that can be converted to a share of voting stock or equity, less contingent or future shares owned by a person whose financial or controlling interest in an entity is active. So what that last part basically means is fully diluted means if you issue stock options to somebody and they haven't exercised them, the OCM will still count that towards the ownership. So if Zach and I were in business together and Zach owned 100%, but he gives me stock options for 5%, OCM, even though I don't own the stock at that point, OCM is going to look at it as Zach owns 95 and I own 5. That's
so even if you set up like a vested strategy, let's say you're I hire someone and I'm going to give them some sweat equity, and it's built down their plan that they can get 3% of equity over the course of 4 years. Does that mean it's already vested to them according to OCM?
Well, it doesn't mean that it's vested. It just means OCM is going to include them as, and for TPI purposes, they're going to be on the cap table, and they're going to want to know that that person is, or they could deem that person a TPI, because that's the whole future equity. So you're not going to get around a TPI limitation by giving somebody, stock options or something like that that'll vest in the future. OCM says, nope, we're measuring that as if they had already vested.
Cool.
Person means an individual, institution, corporation, government, or governmental subdivision or agency, business, trust, estate, trust, partnership, or association, or any other legal entity. Basically, person means kind of anything that can get a license, or a government agency. Pests means weeds, rodents, birds, insects, or other animals or organisms that present the threat of contamination to cannabis and cannabis products, especially drying, curing, or processing of cannabis flower.
It's interesting they don't put humans on that list.
Fair point. Photosynthetic photon efficacy, PPE, means photosynthetic photon flux divided by input electrical power. In horticultural lighting equipment, efficacy refers to micromoles of photon output per second per watt of input power. Phytocannabinoids refers to any of the chemical compounds excluding terpenes or any other compound determined by the office that are the active principles of the cannabis sativa, including but not limited to THC and CBD, and does not include synthetic cannabinoids, as that term is defined in subdivision G of Schedule I of Section 3306 of the Public Health Law. That's where they define controlled substances. Plant protection products means products applied during the cultivation of cannabis, including insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, rodenticides, and plant growth regulators. Processing means blending, extracting, compounding, infusing, making, preparing, manufacturing, packaging, labeling, or branding cannabis products. Processor means a licensee that extracts concentrated cannabis or compounds, blends, extracts, infuses, or manufactures concentrated cannabis or cannabis products, but not the cultivation of the cannabis contained in the cannabis products. Public convenience and advantage standards means standards used to determine whether or not the board will grant a license to a licensee, which will not result in oversaturation of adult use cannabis licensees, including, but not limited to, the number, classes, and characters of the licenses in proximity to the premises and in the particular municipality or subdivision thereof. Evidence that all necessary licenses and permits have been obtained from the state and all other governing bodies, whether there is a demonstrated need for such license, effect of the grant of the license on pedestrian or vehicular traffic and parking in proximity to the premises, the existing noise level at the premises and any increase in noise level that would be generated by the proposed premises, and any other factors specified by law or regulation that are relevant to determine the granting of a license would promote public convenience and advantage and the public interest of the community. This actually, I'm pretty sure, comes right out of the alcohol law. It's a concept for when bars and liquor stores go into an area and apply for a liquor license. Record means books, ledgers, documents, writings, photocopies, correspondence, electronic storage media, electronically stored records, money receptacles, equipment in which records are stored, or any other document that is used for recording information. Registered organization with dispensing, ROD, means a registered organization, adult use cultivator, processor, distributor, retail dispensary licensed pursuant to cannabis law section 68A. So those would be a fully vertically integrated medical cannabis company that is also going to be an adult use. So the other type of license under 68B is the registered organization non-dispensing license, means a registered organization, adult use cultivator, processor, and distributor license under 68B. Retail package means retail packages defined in 128 of this title. Road, and I just have to point out because it's kind of funny to see road because most people understand what a road is, but like this came out, I'm imagining, of like the card guidance when they were talking about how far the distance is from a school versus how far a distance is from the house of worship, and in one they used roads and the other one they used streets, and everybody was like, is there a difference? And so now we know there is no difference because road means any wide way leading from one place to another, including but not limited to an alley, avenue, boulevard, causeway, court, crescent, drive, lane, loop, place, plaza, promenade, street, terrace, or way. School grounds means any building, structure, and surrounding outdoor grounds, including entrances or exits contained within a public or a private preschool, nursery school, elementary, or secondary school's legally defined property boundaries as registered in a county clerk's office, as defined by section 409 of the education law. Important because it does include the grounds, which I believe, though I have not looked up myself, I believe the alcohol law does not include the grounds. I think they just measure to the door. So a little different there. Secondary school means a school between the elementary school and the college or university. Serious adverse event means a serious adverse event as defined in part 113 of this title. Social and economic equity applicant means an individual or an entity that is an applicant for an adult use license pursuant to part 120 of this title, and who is eligible for priority licensing pursuant to the criteria established in Article 4 of the cannabis law based on the applicant's status as an individual from a community disproportionately impacted, a minority-owned business, a woman-owned business, a distressed farmer, or service-disabled veteran. This is interesting because we're going to get to, I forget what it is, I think it might be it's in part 121, where they actually talk about priority licensing, and that definition seems to change a little unless something has changed between this version and the previously released version. So keep that one in mind. Social and economic equity licensee means an individual or an entity that applied for licensure as a social and economic equity applicant, has been granted an adult use license subject to part 121 of this title, and maintains their status as an individual from a community disproportionately impacted, a minority-owned business, women-owned business, a distressed farmer, or service-disabled veteran as described in part 121 of the title. Sole control, another important definition that I believe applies to the social and economic equity applicants and licensees. Sole control means is independently owned, operated, and controlled, has real, substantial, and continuing ownership, exercises the authority to independently, materially influence the day-to-day business decisions, operations, strategic priorities, capital allocations, acquisitions, and divestments, has an ability to direct decisions, voting or otherwise, and an interest in the capital, assets, and profits and losses of the business, at least proportionate to the percentage of ownership, has the right to execute significant, in aggregate of $10,000 or greater, or exclusive contracts, that there are no timed or triggered recusal provisions related to the individual with sole control, and that there are no other person or persons in the aggregate who may exercise or have the ability to control the majority of the voting rights or appoint or remove the majority of the director seats or their equivalent, or corporate officers or their equivalent on the governing body. This is again important because they, social and economic equity applicants have some advantages under the law, but of course people want to try to game the system and take away that control. This is all meant to say, no, you can't do those things. You can't say, well, at this point, we get to make this decision, and we are not the social and economic equity act. You can't do that kind of stuff. You can't get around the rules. Mm-hmm. Tincture means a non-potable edible cannabis product that is a cannabis extract solution intended for human consumption or ingested, dissolved in alcohol, glycerin, or plant-based oil that shall include a calibrated dropper or other similar device capable of accurately measuring services. True party of interest, my favorite definition. It includes, but is not limited to, the applicant or licensee's sole proprietor, partner, whether limited or general, member, manager, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, officer, board member, trustee, director, or person with equivalent title to each of the foregoing. And I will just point out, because this has actually come up, director, kind of an ambiguous term. Like you would, it does say board member, so maybe it doesn't just, director doesn't just refer to board of directors, but also like a director of marketing who, you know, would just be the head of marketing. Are they a TPI under this? Potentially. So that's kind of an unclear thing. And, you know, you do kind of have to be careful with titles, but then you can also go after equivalent titles as well. So if it does include director of marketing and you just call them the head of marketing, they're going to be included. It also includes stockholder of the applicant or licensee. It includes, I'm not sure why that's a separate thing. Each person that makes up the ownership structure of each level of ownership for an applicant or licensee that has a multi-level ownership structure, including but not limited to subsidiaries, affiliates, parents, shells, and holding companies. So what that is basically you're not going to be able to hide behind a chain of entities. They're going to drill through all of those entities until they find the humans. Person with a right to receive aggregate payments in a calendar year as part of a risk sharing or services agreement that exceeds the greater of, our favorite rule, 10% of gross revenue, 50% of net profits of a licensee, or $100,000 from the licensee in a calendar year. Remember, it's the greater of, so it's not limited to 100,000 as the top. TPI also includes a person with a financial interest in the applicant or licensee. Recall the definition of financial interest. Person that has authority to or exercises control over the applicant or licensee. Person that assumes responsibility for the debts of the applicant or licensee. Or spouse of any individual in clause A or B. And TPI does not include, without limitation, who receives payment for rent on a fixed basis lease or receives payment for rent on a fixed basis under a lease or rental agreement relating to the applicant or licensee. The office may investigate a landlord in situations where a rental payment has been waived or deferred. Receives a bonus or commission from the applicant or licensee based on the individual's sales, so long as the commission does not exceed 10% of the sales of the applicant or the licensee in any given bonus or commission period, unless otherwise determined by the office. Commission-based compensation agreements shall be in writing. Contracts with the applicant or licensee to receive a commission for the sale of the business or real property. Consults receiving a flat or hourly rate of compensation from the applicant or licensee under a contractual agreement, unless such compensation exceeds the limits set forth in this chapter. So you can be a consultant and not be a TPI if you're charging a flat rate. However, even if you're charging a flat rate, if you go over the 10, 50, or 100 rule, you are now a TPI. Is a goods and services contractor, as long as the applicant or licensee retains the right to and controls the business. Is a financial institution, is a financier, or others as may be determined by the office. Use by date means the use by date as defined in part 128. And working stock means part of the inventory available for average demand in a given period. And we've made it through the 83 definitions.
Voila. And there are still magically folks on the call. That was great. I appreciate, again, it's even every time we talk through these things, I definitely gain a different perspective than I had coming in. And there's just like subtle influences. Like the first couple times I read over these, I read it kind of monotone. And then even just seeing like where you place emphasis can impact how the definition even sounds. So I think that's just important to note. The difference between a comma and not having comma can really change the language on a definition, let alone the regs moving forward. So yeah, super helpful. So with that, we've concluded the definitions, part one of the adult use regulations read through series. just thanks to everyone who's on this call. We'll definitely be posting all of this on YouTube. Please share with your community. This is the intent of having an educational resource here. And we will be continuing this programming twice a week. That's going to be Tuesday, Thursday from noon to 1:15. Hopefully, like we covered 23 or 24 pages today. So the goal is to take that chunk on average every session, and we'll bring more perspectives in. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'll drop contact information for the education committee at CANY.org, and happy to kind of field any questions or wants and needs there. Jason, any last thoughts?
Tune in for our exciting continuation of part 119. Yeah, no, I mean, as I said, the definitions are important because those are all going to come through in everything else we read. So there is going to be, I would maybe if you're following along, maybe be able to go back and reference, because they don't say as defined in blah, blah, blah. They'll just use the definition. And if you forget what that means, you got to go back and read it. So,
yeah, another thing to consider too, is there any definitions that we're missing? And we may find that throughout this process that like, well, what does this mean? Like, why did they put tincture in there, you know, as a random definition? And it's so explicit to include the dashes on your dropper. Like, that's just an interesting thing. To me, it feels a little bit of an outlier, but it may have a place throughout the regs. And we may find things throughout the regs that need further definition. So all food for thought. All right, well, on behalf of everyone at CANY, the Cannabis Association of New York, the Rochester Public Library, we're super grateful to share with you, share with your friends, invite your friends, make sure everyone's tuning in. This is the best way we know how to learn, and we're happy to share. Have a great day, have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.